Board. All right. Thank you very much. Great. So this is the release team, Feb 315 release team uh, learning session and meeting. And Llewellyn, since you said you had some questions, why don't you go kick that off, please?
Okay. So the first question, I was reading about these relator codes, and
Mhm.
we didn't have a cataloger on staff today, so I wasn't sure what that was referring to.
Okay. Relayed. I don't think those are actually related to cataloging. Um, are they? Is anybody who builds can tell me that? I think that might be a different one. Um,
Later codes are indeed meant for grabbing uh, uh, cataloging
yeah.
grabbing a list for from a cataloging metadata standard to include in the OPAC.
Well, there we go. I was wrong.
Okay, so
Can
that's
you?
only for the OPAC.
Yeah, the effect it has is only for the OPAC.
TIL. Thank you for asking that question. Do you have other questions?
Yeah, just one more question. I was getting hung up on the PO editor account. I don't know if that costs money, and if so, I don't know how other state funded places are going about getting funding for that.
Right. Yeah, the PO editor is not meant to be paid for by any contributor. It's funded by the Evergreen project itself. Um, Now, I say funded, but that's a misnomer since we get it for free at the moment. But I also have an active to-do list item to sort out the administration of that service. But the upshot is getting your accounts can and will be sorted out.
Thank you, Galen. I think we also need the connection to Git for that, right? Or GitHub.
Yeah, I think yeah, there's also a thing on my to-do list.
Okay. So since given that, oh wait, I don't know if I have too many tabs or not enough tabs. Depends on who you ask. Okay. Um, Galen, do you think you can have those sorted before the next set of point releases come out, which is like 2 weeks from today?
Yeah, yeah, I can do that.
That would be awesome because I think for some people who are newer at translations, it would be cool to do a ride along with the point releases people. And that is, I just had that spreadsheet up. There we go. Um,
There's a whole lot of to be determined for the point releases. So if you see something there that's
oh yeah.
not been filled out and you want to fill it out, that'd be cool.
There is a whole lot of TBD for that.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you, Ruth. Yeah. And for those of you who are uh, maybe less experienced at certain parts of this, I know that Michelle, you've kind of become the translation, the LP and PO editor translation guru. And Gina has taken up building the tarball several of the last several times. And then Martha, I know you've also been involved with testing the tarball. There's no reason that these tasks can only have one name under them, by the way. If somebody else, if you want to coordinate with somebody else, you can do that. Does somebody, so who, let's see, I keep closing tabs that I need. I'm sorry, you guys. I
Can I make
got
a
a little,
comment while you're finding your tab as well?
yeah.
That has to do with what you just said. If you are somebody that wants to learn how to do something, but you are not prepared to be the lead person, if you in one of those cells just want to put TBD / and then your name after that, that will still show that there needs to be somebody there as the lead. And I'm talking about for the point releases, but it could be literally anywhere else too.
Sorry, what was that again? Because I was interested in learning a little bit more about the translation files.
So I'll just if you're in there, are you in the build master right now?
Yeah, I got
Okay,
it.
so I'll just put I'll just put an example in here.
Mhm.
So what I put in is I put under just the Launchpad translations, but it could be also PO editor. I put TBD /
Mhm.
Gmonty there. So if you could use that format, that way it will show that somebody is interested, but they're not prepared to be the lead on it. So if somebody could take the lead and be willing to coordinate with that other person, that would be very helpful.
Cool. Yeah, and I could be the lead on the tarball build for. I know that this is not necessarily 3 for 15, but
Go ahead and fill it
if
out.
someone wants to, yeah, like also shadow me on that, maybe we could do something like that. If you know. All right, thanks,
Cool.
Ruth.
Yep.
Okay. Let's see. So going through the tasks here on the build master sheet. Stop it. I'm sorry, I had some weird family news earlier this afternoon and my mind is elsewhere. I'm trying to focus. So when it comes to uploading the tarball and making the preview live, I know that that is something that currently requires access to the web server. So if that's something that you're interested in doing, just be aware that you'll need to coordinate with somebody with web server access. I know that Galen has web server access, Jason Stevenson, I believe you do as well, and Chris Sharp. And maybe, is that it? Is it just the three of them?
No, there are a couple
Blake.
more. Yeah,
Blake,
Blake,
okay.
and Jason Boyer, I believe.
Okay. Can we edit this? I'm going to actually put that in the task roles. So, oh, hi, Jane. So while I'm typing this, does anybody else have questions for our assembled experts?
Are you putting that over under task descriptions, that tab?
Correct.
Okay. Oh, I see. Okay, thanks. Oh, Stephanie has Lupin.
Does she? I don't know if she
know.
does. Maybe she does.
She does. I know she does because
Okay.
she's done some stuff for the website that required it.
Thank you for confirming that. Who? Oh, Jason Boyer, you said was the other one. Okay. So those are, so that is now documented who you need to call for that. And when people have not had Lupin access, they've just put the files, on like an FTP or on Google Drive or somewhere or Dropbox, that the website administrator can get them. And there is a note there that says, there is a Google Drive available for that, that the Evergreen project board runs. So in terms of building the tarball, does somebody with experience with this want to talk about the differences between, and these are at this point fairly well documented in the wiki page, which is here, by the way. Does somebody want to talk about some of the differences between doing this for a point release versus doing it for a major release, as well as some potential gotchas that a new builder or a new release team member might need to be aware of?
I'll start and
Thank you.
Open the floor up to Jason Stevenson and Jane Sandberg et al. To throw spitballs at me when I get it wrong.
Yeah, and well, and Gina too, I'd be interested in your thoughts because you've been doing it more recently too, Gina. So
yeah. So one of the bigger differences between major releases and point releases is in the salience of some of the steps around translation. So starting with a release early in the cycle, generally a beta release, although it could start with an alpha release if you choose to do one for 3.15. You will want to make sure that the steps to extract and publish strings to be translated in Launchpad and PO editor and so on are done to give the people working on translations as early an opportunity to start the work as possible, since generally speaking, the major releases are inherently where the largest number of string changes will have their origins for a release.
right. And this is why we have string fees, translation string fees, in advance.
Yeah.
So
for the maintenance releases, we do those steps as well, but the time frame is both necessarily a bit shorter, and also there's usually less for the translators to do. Now there generally won't be some translations for them to deal with, but not always. The other big thing about doing a major release for the first time has to do with branch management. One part is making sure in Launchpad that a new series has been registered for translations. The other big component, and this is a bit fuzzy, but typically around beta, but it could be around alpha to be super early, or RC if we're super late, is making the decision on when to branch off the series release from main. So in this case, concretely, that would be when to carve out rel 3.15 from main. And I think nowadays concretely feature slush could be an opportunity to do it, or feature freeze could be an opportunity to do it. But the point is to wait to do it until we're at a point where you're sure that there aren't going to be too many major new features added in the release, so that you don't unnecessarily end up making the core committers to push to both main and rel 3.15 when main and rel 3.15 are going to be basically the same. But you do want to branch it off pretty soon after feature freeze, so that you don't hold up any feature merging that would instead be targeted for 4.0. So yeah, I think Andrea's recollection is correct that nowadays it mostly corresponds with freeze, but there can be an opportunity for a judgment call about exactly when to do it. The other main thing that makes a major version release special is not a structural thing, but it's an effort thing, would be the construction of the version upgrade SQL script. And that's because it's not particularly conceptually different from any release where you're aggregating the SQL updates and source SQL PG upgrade and creating a consolidated script from them. It's just they again necessarily the set of changes from previous version .x to new version .0 is going to be large, and there can be timing issues and consideration about the previous version's starting point. So to speak concretely, by the time that you're ready to start cutting the beta for 3.15, Evergreen 3.14 will be at 0.6, 0.7, something not like that. And you generally want to base the consolidated upgrade script from whatever stable version was in place at the point in time that you do the beta release. Now, this can potentially be moved up. So, depending on how the testing process goes, you could have a 3.14.7 to 3.15.0 upgrade script. But if testing is prolonged or whatever, yeah, you might end up on release day, basing it on 3.15 and 3.14.8, so that there's the 3.14.8 to 3.15.0 script. And again, these specific starting off point for that can be a bit of a judgment call. And at least at the moment, until such time as somebody gets it to its to revamp how Evergreen manages its database and schema updates, the considerations around SQL transaction management and so on for the big consolidated version upgrade script can be different from the transaction management constraints for each of the individual schema update, little schema update scripts. So the upshot is, you very much do have to explicitly test the version upgrade script, not the version dash upgrade script. It's not just you can't just rely on what MakeGravity's builds for you. So I think that's all that occurs to me with respect to some of the things that are the big differences between a .0 release and the prep work leading up to it versus a normal monthly release. But I think it's also important to emphasize that a lot of the concepts are the same. You know, there isn't anything inherent to the tarball that makes the .0 tarball special in that sense of somebody just picking it up and installing Evergreen for the first time from it.
At what point in the process do you recommend testing the upgrade script? I mean, obviously following the tarball creation, but
actually before the tarball, the tarball. Well, yeah, actually, I was going to say before the tarball creation, and yeah, that's actually a good point to consider doing it, because of the way that the make of these works. There will be a point where it asks you, where you have the option to create the initial version of the consolidated upgrade script. But if it already exists in the branch, you can bypass that. So the upshot is that if we really wanted to the consolidated version upgrade script, it could actually be assembled and done as a literal pull request like any other bug. Now, I'm not suggesting actually going that far, but within the release team, I think it does make a great deal of sense to, as soon as you're sure that you've stopped pushing schema modifying commits in preparation to the beta or whatever, to make release build you the version upgrade script, make any immediate edits to it, and then test amongst yourselves, or or enlist aid from others to fully, to do some validation of it. And I would especially call that out for the beta itself. Now, of course, if there turn out to be major changes between beta and RC, doing it for the RC as well can be advised. It is also important to mention that with respect to any test system you're using for testing the schema update, that in one sense, that sort of a testing can be a bit destructive in your test database, as in, if your personal workflow doesn't entail a lot of rebuilding your database from scratch, you may want to make sure that you have a special backup copy of your test database, prior to doing the testing of the consolidated upgrade script.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. Jason or Jane, do you have anything? Jason Stevenson or Jane, do you have anything to add to that?
I had a question for Galen, which is, what do you usually do to test an upgrade script?
That's a very good question.
Yeah, so there are the simple sorry, not simple. There are complicated ways to manage versions of your test database. And if we get to that, I will mention that I think it was Jason Stevenson who has inspired some of them. But putting aside doing anything fancy with your test database, the approach I highly recommend is first setting up a completely fresh installation of the previous version of Evergreen that you'll be upgrading from. So again, let's be concrete. Let's say it's 3.14.7. So you set up a complete database with Concerto at least, and then do the install, run the version upgrade script, run the rest of the upgrade for things like version dependencies, run off the tests, and that includes the Angular tests, the few Angular JS tests that exist, the OpenServe, the Evergreen API tests, the live tests, the PGTab tests, and the PGTab live tests. It sounds like a lot of work, but it's necessary work. But this is also where if your personal development environment is set up that you can easily stand up and tear down VMs with whatever Evergreen version you're working with at the moment, that can make your life easier. And so for example, there are things like Ansible, recipes and so on to say, grab Evergreen at a specific version, install it, and then you can work from there to test the upgrade script. Now, there are shortcuts. The shortcuts are handy. They can also be a trap for the unwary. So if you were asking me, what do I do in my actual, life, my development system has a number of separate databases that exist in it. I can do an Evergreen database setup in Concerto install from any version I need to, and then I can from there manually run the version upgrade script, see if it fails for any reason, and then go through the various aspects of testing the Evergreen system. And I think the other thing is a good chunk of the schema update testing is this is your opportunity to engage in your automate paranoia. So things like has big new chunks of configuration data been added, as was the case with 3.13, I believe. Make sure it all works out. Make sure that it makes sense. And I think also remember that around the release process of this testing is ideally a collective process, as in, have everybody in the release team is in a position to test to do so. And as far as the rest of the community is concerned, be creative about things like showing up at people's doors at midnight, bribing them with the chocolates of their choice to test, and so on and so forth.
I have a budget request for the project board. Thank you.
I have some advice that is just not related to the question, Andrea, that you asked of the differences between point releases and the feature releases. But that's just, I found myself very intimidated by this whole process and did not want to mess it up. And I was particularly intimidated by like the make release script that Galen referred to. But it is not destructive at all to run that on your local machine. Like it's not going to like send out any alerts saying the release is done. It's not going to push anything to the Git repositories. So I would highly recommend before cutting a release to just go into your development environment and try running make release and maybe experiment with some of the different flags so that you can get more familiar with it so that it's like a known quantity when you're actually ready to cut the release.
Thank you, Jane. That's good advice. So don't be afraid to experiment. It will not. All of this is a very manual process. So all of the cutting and the pushing and the updating Launchpad and updating the website, that's all a person has to do that, which is a different problem. But Jane's point is well taken that because of all of that, there is, you can certainly go and practice building tarballs and stuff like that. Also, don't forget about the release notes. No, I never forget about the release notes. They haunt my dreams.
Yeah, and this, that particular item was not directed at you in that particular entry.
But yes, when you create the release branch, then you need to also create there's a script that will pull things out of the release notes next folder and put them in the rudimentary version of the release notes, which then gets edited and cleaned up. But there is also there's a piece of it that I always forget, which is the symlink portion.
Yeah. So a few years ago, the project switched to what, for lack of a better word, I'll call progressive release notes. So, by that I mean you do the .o release, and then when you do .1, the release notes are a separate file on the web server, but the document has the 0.1 release notes and then the 0.0 release notes below it, and then of course it goes all the way up. But the convention is that if you go to the link on the downloads page for the 3.15 release notes, that link will always be the same. Release notes 3.15.h.tml or whatever. But when it comes time to upload it, that destination, which is a symlink on the server, just needs to point out the latest and greatest, the 3.15.1 or 3.15.2 nodes. So that's just a mechanical step on as part of uploading the various build artifacts to the server.
That's in this section of the notes. So that's part of why I always forget about that, is that I am not one of the people that has server access. So I will throw the release note files at Git and then be like, oh, right, somebody needs to do that other piece. So, cool. Jason Stevenson, did you have anything to add to this?
No, not a whole lot. My testing process is pretty much what Galen described.
Cool.
I sometimes test a full upgrade, but not always. Usually just the database part. And I do that. Usually I just I usually use a separate VM for building. I usually have set up a VM just for building tar balls. Then I have another VM to test. And so I'll install like the previous release, or even sometimes just make the database setup for the previous release, and then run the DB upgrade on there. And if there's any problems, I adjust the DB upgrade as appropriate. Generally they just load, but occasionally there's issues with transactions. I think the last couple of major releases had those, in fact. There was, I think on 3.14, we had to split it into 2 transactions and then have something else run outside of a transaction, because on PG10 it wouldn't work in a transaction. But those instances are rare. So they're becoming more common as we're getting more complicated features like did you mean in the MFA. It was the MFA that required being split up. Then one thing I do on the where you build the release notes on there, one thing I do is I actually don't name the files, just like 3.12 or whatever for point releases. I'll name them, I'll add the full like 3 underscore, like, okay, let's say we're doing 3.14.4, or not, what's the next one is 3.14, yeah, the next one's 3.14.4. So I would, go underscore 3 underscore 14 underscore 4, and then copy those up to the server, because that's how they end up being named there. And then on the server, we move the link. So maybe we could update the documentation to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, because that's definitely not how I've been doing it. Right on.
I'm not logged into the wiki right now, am I? I'll have to check. Oh, I am. Suppose I can update that right now.
That would be helpful. Thank you. Cool. In terms of building and testing, Gina, I know that you've done the past couple point releases, and Martha and Jane, I know you've been doing some testing for point releases. Anything that you've run into in that process that you want to call out that you think might be different in a major release, or concerns that you might have? Well, we have assembled experts here to answer your questions.
I think the only thing was like I would like to get some kind of server access to upload the tar balls along with excuse me, the readmes and release notes as well, because right now I'm just kind of like doing things on Google Drive. But Chris Sharp and I have been talking about that. I didn't follow up just yet, but I will do that. prior to the 19th, I think, is when the next point release happens. But yeah, I've just only been doing the point releases so far for the tar balls. I think the only like big thing is to just make sure that OpenSurf is installed and current. It's the only thing I got.
OpenSurf doesn't have to be installed on the machine where you build it. It does have to be present. If it's not installed, there's a rather cryptic mention of the -J option up under run the release builder script. And it says use the J flag to point wherever your OpenSurf JavaScript lib source is. So basically, if you have it checked out or just extracted a tarball, you use -J with the path to wherever the OpenSurf source JavaScript directory lives. Usually I do usually install OpenSurf on my build machine all the way, but sometimes I don't because I will every couple of releases, like I don't know, after about 4 or 5 releases, I'll delete that VM and build it fresh. So if I'm in a rush, I'm trying to get it done now, I'll just, check out an appropriate version of OpenSurf for the release. Usually that's the latest one, but if it's an older release, I might check out an older OpenSurf release, if it's not compatible for some reason. That's rare these days, but it does happen occasionally.
Thank you.
And this also reminds me of a consideration around the personal development and testing environments of the release team. It is a good idea to avoid all of you falling into exactly the same way to do it. Be it like Stalker images or everybody on Debian or everybody on Ubuntu or so on. I highly encourage you to make sure you have some variety in your personal setups, because that can be a collective way to make sure that some of the platform differences that exist among the user base are reflected by y'all.
Yeah, I was actually, thank you for, it's the second time today you've read my mind. I was going to ask if there are any considerations, any differences to consider using the Docker image for full for a major release build and testing versus point release build and testing.
Yeah, and I think it's a valid approach to use it. But wow, I wouldn't go so far as to suggest that anybody try to revive the Fedora Red Hat port of Evergreen or something like that, unless you both have an interest and perhaps a bit of tolerance for pain. Rotating things around and making sure that there's a bit of variety is a good idea. I think in the long run, we can rely on GitHub Actions to provide the automated, consistent testing point as that infrastructure gets built out over time.
Cool, thanks. To talk a bit about translations, Michelle, I'm gonna pick on you now, since you've done translations the last several go rounds, for which we were all very grateful.
Yeah, I think it was only
Is that-
two, but
Well,
more than one, so.
more than once. I don't see anybody else on the historical list there. Although I guess I'm looking at the news sheet. But yes, what is time? So yeah, did you I know I think at the last meeting, Martha, you had mentioned that you wouldn't mind working with, it would be easy for you to work with Michelle. to learn about translations, or am I inventing that in my brain?
Yep. I did look over Michelle's shoulder.
Cool.
When she was doing that. So yeah, that was very helpful.
Okay. Anything that either of you two, I know that, I mean, I've got a note about the PO editor and get credentials set up to remind to do my Galen poking before February point release. And is there anything that about that process that you guys wanted to talk about or ask questions about, or
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to do a run through, as was suggested earlier. Jane had mentioned, try some of this stuff. So it would be interesting to do a dry run of some of this stuff, building the translations, building a tarball. So.
Yeah, and there are PO editor permissions that you need that I originally didn't have. So I don't know if we know who has those permissions, and we could maybe document that on the sheet like we just did for the Lupin access.
Don't know off the top of my head who has those for, I mean, Galen, but there's, I think Blake, Jason Stevenson. What about you?
I thought I made a list one time, but I can't seem to find it.
Okay.
And I'd have to sign in. There's a place on PO Editor I think we can see who has all the permissions, and I'd have to log in.
Okay.
Let me
Right, and I'm looking at that now.
Okay.
And I'll go ahead and transcribe the list of people who have permissions and who are not ghosts.
Oh, I also see that we don't have task descriptions for that in our task descriptions tab. Okay. Is there so silly question time? So Jane, as Jane mentioned, there's no there's no automation or whatever surrounding building a tarball that you can, do your dry run and it won't affect anything. But my knowledge of PO editor is much more shaky. Is there any kind of inherent, like if we go and do a test run of translations, is it going to get cranky later and be like, no, you've already done this? Or is there any kind of similar risk there? Does that question even make sense?
It's a pretty low risk. Notice, PO Editor has an API, but because of the general workflow about how you upload strings and how you tag them to identify them for translators and so on, as long as you don't upload garbage, it's going to be a pretty low risk to experiment with uploading those string packs and grabbing translations and so on.
Cool. Love it.
Yeah, I'll just add I uploaded them during the 3.14.0 release. I uploaded them, I think, 3 times to PO Editor for the I forget exactly why, but I think at one point I made a mistake and I had to upload them again, and maybe it was only twice, but anyway, yeah, I think it just, if you upload a new one, they just get added. And so it doesn't, as long as, like Galen says, as long as you don't upload garbage, I think it's fine.
Okay. And for that, looking at the notes, it says that you need to be a PO editor admin to do that. It says
to do all the steps you do.
Yeah.
Yeah, the first time I did it, I was part of the PO editor project, but I didn't have the admin permissions, and I I couldn't upload. Like I
Yeah,
did.
because it's that Angular staff client updates or where it says you need to be a PO editor admin to do that. Okay, so Galen, if you could add that to your list, please. That looks like so maybe Gina and Martha might also need to be promoted to admin. Llewellyn too, if you're interested. So
One of the things I hope is that when we get the GitHub integration set up with PoEditor, we can skip the upload step.
yeah,
And I think we can also we should be able to move the Launchpad translations over to PoEditor, and we wouldn't have to do all the Launchpad steps either. I think because it's called PoEditor, it should pull the translations from the PO files in Evergreen automatically. But I'm not sure entirely how all that works. So there's still maybe something we need to do on that side.
yeah. And I think that was, if I'm, gosh, casting my brain back 5 whole months ago, to the Hackaway. I think that was one of the things we talked about with the Git integration at Hackaway was reducing those steps.
Yeah.
Even probably eliminating a couple of them.
Yeah,
So
at some point, I think the goal is to end up, all we have to do is export translations from PoEditor back to our Git. But
right. Okay. Cool. All right. We're coming up on our hour. Thank you all very much for your wisdom and your questions and the discussion. Does anybody have anything that they want for the good of the order that they want to bring up? Any questions? Any concerns? I'm going to pick on Jason Etheridge because Jason Etheridge, you're the only person, the only release team member with full commit access as far as I know. So do you have any specific, questions, qualms, concerns? Because we will be leaning on you and your commitment throughout a lot of this process. So
I don't at the moment, but I will, I'm sure.
yeah. Okay. I know. I'm sorry to put you on the spot like that.
I do have another question about translations, not the PO editor part, but the Launchpad part. And it says, let me post this into chat. Where's my chat? There it is. So the page I'm posting into chat, it says in order to be able to do the Launchpad translations for a new release, you need to be a member of both the Evergreen release team and the Evergreen bugs team.
Oh, you mean an actual Launchpad?
In Launchpad, yes.
Okay.
Is that actually true?
I have no idea.
Yeah, it is true.
Okay.
All right, so let's see what we have. 17, well, 16 people, since we're not counting the bot. All right, yeah, you're there, Jason Etheridge. You're there as well, Michelle. So I think the basically what we need, and in this case by we I mean me, is send me your Launchpad username, and I can add you to the release team on Launchpad.
hey, Galen, can you make me an administrator in that group? And maybe take it away but just swap me and Ben Shum as administrators? I mean, Ben's a nice guy and he still hangs around, but I don't think he's going to do much administration of the release team.
That's
Yeah,
valid.
yes. Dubious. Okay, so Jason, you now have admin privileges, and now remove them from Ben.
Okay. As discussed earlier, Galen, Launchpad is one of the only logins of mine where I don't use AB Nyman. I'm not sure why. But if you could
Launchpad
please.
is special.
And the wiki, Launchpad and the wiki. I have they're like the only two accounts in my entire personal and professional life that are not AB Nyman. So there you go. If you want to hack me, everyone knows what login I always use.
All right, you're added, Andrea.
Thank you. So yeah, so anybody who needs to request being part of the release team or the what's the other one, bug wranglers team
Yeah.
on Launchpad, please drop your Launchpad handle in so Galen can promote you, or so Jason Stevenson can promote you.
All right. Give me a moment to get those assignments added.
Cool. Anything else while we're all here? Questions, comments, concerns? Okay. To people, those who are on the release team, if you haven't taken a look at the summary for bug squashing week, as well as the roadmap updates, I recommend that you do that. There was some cool smaller features merged last week that I took the liberty of adding to the roadmap as things we want to call out as features. So just take a look at that. And we are looking at 5 weeks about until slush. So I think for the time being, we want to keep an eye out for anything that's pull requested that wants community review and testing, and I will keep an eye out for that stuff as well, particularly since several of them are coming from my team at Equinox. And in the meantime, like I said, if any of you want to participate with the February point release team, whether as a as a task person, please sign up on the sheet, or if you just want to shoulder surf, and recommend that you do that as well. And there will
Also
likely
sign
be
up on the sheet.
also sign up on the sheet. There will likely be a call going out for that at next week's developer meeting.
That's correct.
So, okay. If nobody has anything else, thank you all so much, release team members, invited experts. I really appreciate y'all's time and helping to spread this knowledge, which is obviously my not so secret goal here. I think that is the theme of this particular release team, is that spread the knowledge. All right.
Thanks, Andrea.
Thank you,
And
everybody.
everybody
Thank
else.
you. Yeah, thanks, Galen, for making those changes. And I will talk to you all later.
Thank you. This has been great.
Thank you. Bye.
Appreciate it.
Bye.